Welcome to this week's BitShares DEV Hangout. This recording is brought to you by the Beyond Bitcoin crew. We welcome all BitShares members to join us weekly and discuss the latest news, updates, and developments. If you'd like to participate in our next meeting, then please join us live on Mumble every Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Did you know the Beyond Bitcoin show now has a registered delegate? Please consider voting if you find our Hangouts and recordings useful. The delegate name to vote for is fuzzy.beyondbitcoin. Again, that's fuzzy.beyondbitcoin. The Beyond Bitcoin crew would like to send out a big thank you to everyone who's already voted and allowing us the opportunity to serve the BitShares ecosystem and our valued community members. So once again, welcome and please enjoy the show.
Welcome everybody to another Beyond Bitcoin Hangout with the BitShares community. Bytemaster is here today from Cryptonomex, his newly formed company that is going to be providing blockchain services across the world and of course to BitShares as well. For those who are not familiar with this format, we generally will open up with Bytemaster giving us some updates on the projects that he's working on, give us some insights, and then we open it up to community questions. With that said, Bytemaster, I'll go ahead and pass the torch on to you.
All right. This week we have been actively preparing to launch a public test network. The amount of work that we have to do there is more than we'd like, but we're making steady progress and hope to get something out soon.
Is that the DevShares network, or?
This will be pre-DevShares. It'll be kind of like the dry runs that we did last summer.
Gotcha. Fox wants to know if this is open to everyone.
Yes, we're trying to get to a point where we're comfortable opening it up to everyone. So it really amounts to us working through a lot of the minutia, right? We've got all the big stuff working, but there are just a lot of little details that need to get finished off, and we're hoping that the GUI can get far enough along that it's generally usable.
Sure. So the GUI interface is probably what's slowing things down to a degree.
It's both sides. I won't lie and say that the back end stuff is done. All you have to do is look at GitHub to see that we're still tweaking small little things, trying to make sure we've got all the ends covered up. But there's a lot of work that needs to be done on the user interface, and Kronos, SVK, Cass, and Valentine are working very hard to make that happen. That said, the work that I have seen on it is amazing. The performance of the user interface is unlike anything we're used to with BitShares. I think it really helps having things update in a fluid, timely manner. The new exchange interface is really looking nice. So we're going through lots of debate about which way to lay it out. Ultimately, I think there's different layouts for different types of traders. And with the framework we've got now, it should be relatively easy to make it modular. So we're hoping to give users a choice of the exchange layout. But there are a lot of features that we need to get right and that don't exist in BitShares that we need to have a user interface for, including account permissions, withdrawal permissions. There's more things to vote on. So there's a lot of things that we're looking at there. I hope to get some mock-ups of the user interface that we've been putting together out in the next week, so you all can start to see the general workflow and the concepts that are going into the wallet.
Data Security Node is asking if DevShares is going to continue to be available also in version 0.9.2, or if Graphene DevShares is going to replace it. Is it going to be a decision that's up to the community, or how's that going to go?
Yeah, we don't do anything with DevShares 0.92 anymore. So It's there for anyone who wants to test stuff with the current BitShares code. So it probably still exists, but there will be a new dev network for the new code base.
Gotcha. Is that pretty much where we stand right now? I mean, I would like to ask you when the projected times that this will be ready are, but it's so difficult to ask that question because there's so many things that can get in the way. I mean, do you feel like you can give an answer to that, or maybe that we should hold off on it?
Every answer I've ever given has tended to be wrong. So the only thing I can tell you is that we are working very hard and we're making progress every day, and that we're not going to let perfect be the enemy of good enough. So we recognize the need to ship the product, and we're still targeting the end of summer for the release, but the intermediary steps between now and then are hard to predict because it really depends upon when issues come up, how long it takes to fix them. It's really hard to predict when you're going to run into a bug that just you lose a whole day on and it wasn't in the plan. So those things happen in software development, and they happen all too frequently. We're looking at things, and we're setting up some contingencies to make sure that we don't delay 2.0 longer than necessary. One of the things that we're looking at doing is holding off the bond market features, primarily because we don't have a user interface. We don't want to have to develop a user interface. We don't have one for it right now, and we want to make sure that it's thoroughly tested to the same standard as everything else. So it seems like the bond market was one of the least understood features. It's still there. We still have all the code for it, and it's still implemented. But we might postpone that until a 2.1 release that brings that back into the fold. We're just trying to look for things we can do to make sure that the core product is ready and out there, and that we don't delay the core product trying to perfect features that, if we were honest, there's a much lower demand for at this point in time. Especially without a user interface. So yeah, that's the one feature that we announced for 2.0 that might be delayed.
Well, let's open this up for community discussions then. Does anybody have anything that they'd like to bring up? I do, but I want to open it up for you guys first before I just run with it. Okay. I don't want to say the community has been upset or frustrated about the Cryptonomex move. There's actually been a lot of people who are very pumped up about it because there are some positive things to this, right? One of which is that the development team is going to be able to be completely sustainable. With regard to this, though, it does open up a lot for our community to consider, right? We all have to talk about this. We all have to think through it. We all have to ask questions about where we want this to go. And I've been thinking myself, obviously, I'm a fanboy of what you guys do. Okay, I'll start off by saying that it should be obvious. So I probably don't need to say it. And I trust you guys. Now, with that said, there's always a reason in life to have contingency plans because things never work out quite as you expect them to or hope them to. Sometimes they work out better. Sometimes they work out in ways that you don't want, right? But to me, I've been finding myself asking, what happens? What if the black swan event happens and something happens to Cryptonomex? And, some people have brought up the counterparty issue where counterparty lost developers to overstock. And I can see that as a possibility, but I'm not too concerned about it. What I am wondering, though, is if I approach people and I say, as a developer, you should join up with us and work on BitShares with us. A lot of them are going to say, well, why don't I just start my own chain? Because then I can at least have a chance of getting a big stake in it. Because right now, the way that the current dev team is, you guys hold a large stake, right? And there are people who vote in the community.
Hold on, but there's a big assumption that we hold a large stake.
A large voting stake.
or at least that the developers hold a large stake. You know, there is a whale who is not a developer who owns a large stake, and I vote for it. But the AGS fund that was a large stake is more or less gone. So it's no longer a large stake. Right? All other stake is in the hands of mostly not developers. All right. Our developers have been working, you know, they're relatively young, out of school a year or two, and they only have what they've been earning as their paycheck, and they've been working for below market wages for 6 months. They don't have a large stake in BitShares. Almost everyone out there who's interested at all in this project probably has a stake equal to or larger than the individual developers. So now I have a large stake because I've been around from the beginning, and I had a lot of mining in PTS, and you know, I've done some good trading, but even my stake is smaller than many people would assume. And you know, I don't necessarily want to advertise that. Sure, go ahead. You know, think I've got a large stake, but it leads to us not dealing with the reality. And the reality is community wants loyalty of the developers. The developers want loyalty of the community. And the only way for the developers to have loyalty to the community is if they have a reasonably large stake. And that's the biggest challenge, is no one wants to do dilution. We've got dilution caps in place because of people's fears. And you can't have loyalty without having ownership. It's end of story. Nothing else matters. You can talk about whether they should be loyal to this, that, and the other thing, or the philosophies, why not? But at the end of the day, you have to expect people to work on what they're passionate about, and work on what makes them money, and work on what they own. So if we want to get talent, we got to give them ownership. And it's long been an issue that fear of dilution could end up not having the proper incentives to keep the technology developing. And I'm not trying to threaten the BitShares community and say, hey, you need to pay us more or else. I'm just trying to be very realistic. And I'm trying to keep the development team together and focused and committed to BitShares. Cryptonomex was the way I found to do that. It allows us all to monetize our skills jointly rather than trying to do it individually. Keeps us connected, keeps us focused on BitShares. But you know, if I hadn't created Cryptonomex and created something that the developers could jointly own, then the developers would have probably moved on by now. So anyone who's got fears of Cryptonomex, well, look, Cryptonomex is the only thing that's saving BitShares from, you know, retaining the development team for BitShares. So I think as long as BitShares continues to hire Cryptonomex to improve things, BitShares could be our biggest and most loyal customer. And that is what we would like to see. We just need to be really honest with each other. And there's a lot of people out there that like to spread FUD about the developers being greedy. And I can tell you that this development team is the least greedy individuals I know. They're very passionate about what we're doing. They're willing to make huge personal sacrifices to support BitShares. They're taking huge risks on BitShares. You know, we are, at the end of the day, working to promote BitShares with a much smaller overall stake in the blockchain than the founders of any of the other top 10 currencies out there. So we're doing more for a smaller stake than anyone else, and we're still being accused of being greedy.
I'm going to interrupt you real quick if you don't mind, because this topic itself, the whole concept of dilution is kind of interesting to me, because we've had this issue of, for a long time, we need to pay the development. I know that Star Spirit had some idea basically regarding borrowing from the blockchain to lend out funds for continuing development. But we have to kind of, as a community, find ways to pay the people who are working and who are sacrificing for this project. And the one thing that I've sometimes sat here and been stunned by is how loud some people are about this whole idea of, I think that a lot of the people who get the most upset are the ones who hold some of the largest stakes. And I just kind of shake my head, because this is a struggle that we have to figure out a solution to. And I think Cryptonomex, you guys are trying to find those solutions, which is why you're doing what you're doing. But it is helpful that you kind of clarified some of that you guys are not whales, that there are many people out there who have far larger stake in the project than you do. Because that is one of the key factors to me that I've had problems with, because what I was running into was, what if, there's a worker proposal that's put out, and let's say Cryptonomex, and you've already clarified that this is not the case, so I want to say that right out. But in my hypothetical situation, before I realized this, was, well, of course they're going to vote on the work proposal, because, and then they're going to increase their stake. So it would be, if you could see it, kind of it creates a loop where Cryptonomex could essentially not vote for any competition, or could vote themselves in for every worker proposal, regardless of whether the community wanted it or not, as long as most of the community was still on an exchange somewhere or not voting with their stake. So that's kind of a very, I'm glad to hear that. Let's just say that.
We have a lot of big whales on our side. Just because whales vote for us doesn't mean that we are voting for us and making it happen. I think that needs to be understood. That, and you will probably see FUD that, well, if Bytemaster doesn't support it, it doesn't get voted in. Well, the fact of the matter is, my opinion will continue to hold sway. It's not absolute sway, but I think that's just the reality when we're small. By the time this is big, it could either go another way, or I could continue to hold sway as long as people still believe in my ability to take it forward. So there's a lot of fear and a lot of uncertainty, but it's all reality. It's the same with every project, and it's all people wanting assurances about things that can't be assured. And I think that as a community, we need to recognize and say, hey, we're all in this, we're all taking risks. There are no guarantees in life. But if we treat each other well, then we have nothing to worry about. So, treat the developers well, they'll stick around. Treat them poorly, they'll leave. That's the same it is as anything else in life. And if we treat you guys well, then you'll stick around. And if we don't, then you'll leave. That's what it comes down to. So let's just treat each other well and stop worrying about, trying to lock it up.
Bytemaster, do you have, I know there's a lot of people that get concerned about the market cap, and do you have any perspective on why the market cap hasn't changed much since the announcement? I mean, I've seen a little bit of fluctuation, but it's not much. I don't know if that's an important thing to answer here, but I know some people are concerned about that. Could you address that?
Market cap is a function of finding buyers. The announcement was more or less an announcement that there was going to be a couple months before anything big happened in BitShares. And so people are playing the wait and see game, as far as I can tell. And I can't really blame them. As this thing gets closer to launch and people start to see more things and start to see how our partnerships and various things play out, price is going to start moving. But it's all just pure speculation at this point. And if people stop selling, then the price will go up.
So you didn't have any you didn't have any hopes that that the announcements were going to bring a big change in the market cap that was not on your radar, really?
I saw the announcements providing more support than causing the price to go up. Yeah, it has had a major impact on the psychology of the entire market from one of pessimism to one of hope. And that's a major change in the market. And I think that the price is much higher today than it would be without the announcement, or if the announcement had been more of a flop.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just going to real quick cover this because we did talk about it last time. Joey D is asking here, there was a discussion on name squatting that I lost track of. Was there a resolution or final say on that?
So we tried to reserve the quality names, which we assumed were relatively short names without numbers in them. And we made the announcement and people realized they could start buying up names for under a penny a name, even though they were longer than 8 characters. And some 20,000 names were registered with a plan for going toward 1 million names. We started looking at this and we needed to put a stop to it because it was bloating the base memory requirements of the system for a bunch of people holding accounts that aren't doing anything. So the initial resolution was that only names registered through the faucet would be migrated without a prefix. And that's after the date that we announced that change. So the squatter got to keep his 20,000 names that he registered, and we did not change the rules ex post facto. But going forward, we realized that as soon as BitShares 2 opens up for business, if the fees are too low, then he's just going to resume what he was doing, which means that we underpriced the names, or there's at least significant demand for those names, which means that we're going to have, we changed the pricing structure in the initial 2.0 to have any account names without a number, regardless of the length, be at least $1, which means if someone wants to buy 1 million names, like the squatter expressed his intention to, it cost him $1 million. That's $1 million of revenue that would go into the DAC. All right. So this would be $1 for a lifetime member, and it's $5 for a non-lifetime member. So that's what we have to do to prevent squatting unprofitably, which means that most account names, if you want a cheap name, are going to have a number in it, because those are going to be the names that are less likely to be resellable. So currently, the other thing that we're looking at doing is having a threshold for the total number of names that can be registered on a given day, and increasing the fee automatically if the total number of names registered exceeds some expected normal rate. And this should cause a back off in the event that someone does try to squat. They'd register a lot of names and the price will start going up and they'd stop. And it's basically prevent the network from being spammed. We have been doing I guess it's kind of a security audit of the entire system to make sure that the fees are sufficient to prevent an attacker from creating a bunch of, I guess in Bitcoin sense, dust transactions, allocating memory and forcing us to keep things in memory and not having to pay very much for it. So we don't want to have the network require 16 gigabytes of RAM on day one when we're small. That's a very high overhead. So we're going to try to govern the rate at which memory grows by controlling fees, primarily with the focus on making sure we actually have legitimate use of the network proportional to the memory use, rather than just a bunch of memory being consumed by people squatting.
The question that I was going to ask was, what is legitimate use? So you're saying illegitimate use would be squatting, essentially.
Well, it's all legitimate. It's just whether or not it's profitable. Someone buys an account for 1 cent and ends up consuming a couple hundred bytes of memory forever. If they're not actually doing transactions with that account, it doesn't pay for itself. And so basically forces all the witness nodes to pay for larger VPS systems and increases costs without generating revenue. It's not so bad if it's one name, but if it's a million names, a million names is a gigabyte of memory usage. And so this one squatter all by himself had it in his mind to register a million names, which would have required us to use a gigabyte of memory right out the gate, just so the squatter could sit on those names. And that's, if we're going to have someone register a million names, well, if they pay $1 million to the network, okay, we'll go to a gigabyte of memory usage.
When will we see a first stab at what fees are going to be with the new system?
If you've been following GitHub, we've been checking those in with a table there. So I'll make a post on the forum with what we're thinking those fees will be.
Thank you.
Okay, so have we covered that sufficiently, or does anybody have any other questions or comments that they'd like to make?
About the only thing I would say is pending seeing what that is. I can check on GitHub and see what those fees are. Will they be comprehensive? Are you going to make a stab, at least an initial stab, at all of the fees, or just the important ones? What's your take on that?
So before we launch, we have to have an initial stab for all fees. So what's in GitHub right now is our current thinking. Now, it's barely been reviewed. Nathan and I have tried to make estimates on what the initial fees should be. So it's currently in there right now.
I guess it's a matter of you determining what the costs are going to be, or the anticipated costs, and the only thing you'll have to gauge that by is our experience with 1.0 work. So how much of that analysis have you done in factoring in what your fees are?
Yeah, we had a whole meeting here discussing what the cost of various operations are. And it boils down to this: if the operation creates or allocates new memory, it's going to cost more. Operations that free up memory are going to cost less. So canceling orders, free. Deleting withdrawal permissions, free. Creating those same objects, more expensive. So that's how we're generally managing. Updating it is going to be cheaper than creating. So that's generally how things will be allocated.
Thanks. That sounds very reasonable and a good approach.
Fox is reminding me that I missed his question, so I'm going to go ahead and ask it here. Any consideration given to implementing name mining to enable squatting, some type of proof of work?
Name mining is just another way of pricing it. Mining is buying. It's just wasting the resources. So no.
So you have other ways that you would like to incorporate this that will not include mining?
Yep. So account names, once they're registered, they exist forever, but they're transferable. I figure no one's going to want to pay a fee just to save the network something. So we also we're working very hard to preserve the history. So if you have the transaction history and it references an account name or number, we don't want to reuse the numbers. So the numbers will be allocated and kept around.
What is your perspective on name transferability? I mean, what is the demand for it, and what issues have you thought about in analyzing that feature?
When you're a company and you have employees come and go, or you have security issues, you need the ability to update your keys. You need the ability to transfer your company account to new management. And that is the number one reason for it.
Is there any risks with regard to other security risks in association with this feature that are a possible exposure?
The only risk is if you're paying someone and they transfer their account to someone else and they don't tell you, and then you send payment. It's kind of like you're sending cash in an envelope to a house and someone moved. Well, the new owner gets the money. If regular users probably won't be selling or transferring their username. And if they do, it's in their own best interest to make sure that anyone they've ever dealt with knows, hey, don't send that to me anymore. I'm over here now. And if it's a company, you actually do want the payments to go with it, right? So I'm selling you the name, and I'm also selling you all the customers and everyone who's dealing with it. So you want all that to move with it. So I think it's up to the users to do that. Now we have a way of transferring names that will indicate a change of ownership versus just updating of a key. And the user interface will be able to say, hey, it's accounts changed owners since the last time you sent. Are you sure? So we'll be able to do those type of warnings.
That's very good. Very good.
There's a question here from Little J, or Little J 890. Does having banks shares as a UIA add value to BTS? Will we be able to buy UIAs like banks on CCEDK, or do we have to use the decentralized exchange?
Well, CCEDK is moving over to being almost entirely implemented on the decentralized exchange, so there will be very little difference between using CCEDK and using BitShares. They will be basically one and the same as far as the markets are concerned. So having banks on BitShares means all the trading volume, all the speculators, all the users, everyone who's interested in buying, selling, and owning banks will become a BitShares user, and they will end up paying fees to the network.
And that's considered a net positive. There are some issues that I've seen in the past, and I don't know everything about it, but there have been some people who have felt like there have been some issues that, how do I say it, have not been fixed on their end based on some issues that, let's say, like insider trading type of stuff on the BankShares network. Now, these are claims. They're not, I have no absolute proof yet. However, there are people who've claimed that there were deals that were made, kind of backroom deals with them, and that it ended up turning out to be kind of a scam. Now, whether Mark, who is the head of all of this stuff, knew about it or not is in question. But there are some kind of muddy waters in that area. Do you guys see, or, well, I'll direct it to you first, Bytemaster, but this is something that might be also interesting to hear from the community regarding. Do you feel like this might be a potential bad thing? Like, do we need to be very careful who we support joining the exchange? I mean, anybody can join it, but should we celebrate everybody who joins it without looking into the backgrounds of their projects and all that good stuff?
Yeah, I think every person that joins us is good. Good or bad publicity. It's publicity. People are hearing about us. Things are happening. Them joining BitShares is a sign of their integrity versus us lack of integrity on the BitShares side, because BitShares is provably honest, transparent, blockchain-based stuff. So if any organization is willing to move their books onto the blockchain, that's basically saying, hey, we're willing to do things completely transparently. So I think that just the fact that someone is willing to move to BitShares and adopt BitShares says something about them. Says more about them than it does about us. Our stance as a community should be that we're all about transparency, integrity, provably honest blockchain, trust-free solutions. That said, I cannot be in the business of auditing stuff. I just don't know. No one really knows. And the word scam is thrown around so much, it almost has no meaning, right? I do not think that word means what you think it means, is the answer I have to give to anyone who starts accusing things of being a scam. So there's a lot of that stuff out there, and there's a difference between a scam and incompetence and unforeseen market conditions. You could be completely legitimate and people could still lose money and people call you a scam. So we need, as a community, to be very careful about calling things scams. We also need to be very careful about giving money. Now, are we as a community recommending people buy BankShares? I don't think that's our position. I think we're glad to have them. but I'm not going to make any market recommendations whether or not it's a good investment. That's between banks and their customers, and they're bringing their customers to BitShares so that they can improve their overall accountability and gain more customers. So it helps them. It's up to them to convince people that they're honest. Never buy anything from anyone that you do not trust or you have questions about. If you don't trust them, then don't buy them. It's fine to recommend others don't if you don't trust them. But as a community, we're not in the role of a ratings agency. We are not a credit. We don't do those type of things. So there's just too much to do, too many unknown unknowns. I have no way to know if we're being scammed by them or not. All I know is that they want to use our stuff and they want to support BitShares and they're friendly people. So I think Mark's done a great job of being transparent, answering all kinds of questions that people may have. So what we have going on right now is a bunch of small players are teaming up, right? It'd be great if we could have a partner with Bitstamp or Coinbase or one of those highly reputable organizations. But they don't need us as much as the little guys need us. So we end up partnering with the little guys, and the little guys are really easy to call scams because, well, they're little. They haven't proven themselves. And so that's the problem we face is, all right, well, we're going to have to go forward with the people that we've got. And we're earning reputation at the same time they are. And I certainly hope that our people we're working with are able to follow through on their end of the deal, right? I hope CCEDK doesn't get hacked. And then they can manage our money and the reserves that they're holding well. But they need to trust us as much as we need to trust them. They're counting us to deliver product that works. They're counting us delivering a product that doesn't get hacked. So this is all mutual dependency between us and them. And we should really assume the best, but prepare for the worst.
Fox asks a question here. Are you willing to describe Cryptonomex' legal relationship with banks? Is there one?
Our relationship with them is they're licensing software and paying us commissions.
Fair enough. Now, Joey D does bring up a good topic here with respect to this, and this is something that I think that we should all be looking at. How are we going to do auditing or legal recourse and accountability on the blockchain? Are we going to have people working for the blockchain, for instance, as investigative journalists? What are we going to do? How is this going to manifest? Because we do need to find some way of, in my eyes, of at least, I wouldn't say necessarily protecting people, but at least giving them information that might be hard to find. Because whenever you have a lack of information, the potential of being quote unquote scammed, it might not actually be a scam. It sounds independent of the platform, Riverhead says. Have you considered this, Bytemaster, how you see this moving forward? Because I do remember you saying something on the Let's Talk Bitcoin episode, some other castle, about self-regulating blockchain. And I find myself thinking that we really need to start focusing on that. And this is just the beginning of, some of the questions that are arising.
My recommendation going forward is the blockchain. You should vote to hire people that are known, public, and working with people you trust. So any developer who wants to do any work for BitShares should probably get a job at Cryptonomex. And then the easiest thing for BitShares voters to do is to hire Cryptonomex until you've got reason to believe that someone else is trustworthy and can do a better job than Cryptonomex. Now, that may seem centralizing, but we centralize things for economic reasons. It is entirely too difficult to vet 100 different developers and to track them. But you can vet one company. So when you vote for a project by Cryptonomex, you're voting for a team led by me with people that have proven they can deliver working products. And so that's a relatively safe bet. And our team and our company can then vet the individuals. So that's the safe thing to do. Yes, it's a centralizing thing to do, to have one company be the sole source provider for things. And I welcome competition, but the competitors need to establish trust the same way that we have established trust. So that just takes time and consistency. And even the developers that we hire and we work with, we require people to volunteer and demonstrate capability before we hire them. And, as they get closer to the team and actually get a paid job, they build up trust. I've had too many times where I hire someone based on a resume and they can't deliver both technical and non-technical jobs. I'm tired of that kind of stuff, and I think the community needs to see the same thing. Have someone deliver something on their own, invest in themselves, and if they're willing to invest in themselves, then it's probably safe for you to invest in them. If they're not willing to invest in themselves, then it's probably not a good thing to fund. And that's just what the community needs to do.
This brings up a good point, because I'm not 100% sure, but it seems like Curiosity might be able to help with some of these things, or like a web of trust type of thing. And you've mentioned webs of trust along with BitShares. Do you see something like that being implemented in the future?
Are you talking to me, Fuzzy?
Oh, of course, Dan. If you're other Dan, Dan Robles, if you would like to speak, feel free to.
Well, Curiosity is one of the things that's being used for or considered for is a way for it's an identity tool for the banking industry. And again, nobody's paid us or anything, but it's some of the conversations we're having with some people in banking who are concerned with identity. And of course, it's a regulated environment in banking. So one of the fears is that, nobody wants to really, you want a secure identity, but you don't want to, lose control of your identity. So what Curiosity may help do is deploy a proxy of oneself. And then that proxy can be, it's not the actual identity. It kind of turns your resume into cryptography. So you can take now your resume and test it against a bunch of different standards of compliance and so forth. And it could tell you what you need to eliminate in order to be compliant, or what you need to do to be compliant. And all these scenarios can be tested prior to exposing yourself. So once you do get yourself into compliance, then you can jump into the regulatory environment and be compliant and conduct business, but without having to show all that other stuff prior. That's one of the applications. But the thing that we're working on in construction is kind of a similar thing on the trust scale, because the primary tool in construction is litigation. So nobody trusts anybody. And there's lawyers everywhere, and everybody steps really lightly and wraps stuff up in really tightened paper. And some people can say things and can't say things to whom and what. It's very confusing, very time consuming, very dangerous. And a lot of people don't work with condominiums, for example, because the potential for litigation is just so high and it could just crush you. So what we're developing is something called the value game. And what it requires is a shared asset. So you have to identify the shared asset. In one case, it might be the condominium structure. It's a building. It's a physical entity. And then you look at all the stakeholders who have an interest in preserving that entity rather than consuming that entity. And then you've altered the incentives. And now those entities are allowed to interact in a manner which preserves everybody's self-interest, but it eliminates the incentive to cheat. So this is something that we're experimenting with. We've tested it in some aspects, but it's called the value game. And at some point, we would be able to identify an asset, generalize this value game, identify an asset, and then assign stakeholders in that asset based on a curiosity profile, and that would theoretically get us through a lot of these issues. But we're still testing, we're still talking, and we haven't built much on that yet.
So hypothetically speaking, it would be essentially possible to, instead of it being a condominium complex, it could be BitShares.
Yes, any asset that people share.
Very interesting.
But the emphasis is it has to be a physical asset. And this is where the community of the Bitcoin, the whole cryptocurrency community is falling short. And they're dealing with banking assets and insurance assets, which really don't exist. They're just representatives of some physical asset somewhere down the line. So, the proposition is to ground all this stuff in physical assets or physical things that people use, that people share. In which case, if you look at the big picture, you're essentially storing value in infrastructure, as opposed to storing value in, all the things that Bitcoin can do that you can't do before Bitcoin. I mean, that's questionable proposition for an asset value, but not so for tangible infrastructure. That's base infrastructure like, roads, bridges, highways, infrastructures, and schools now become the central assets by which people are incented to preserve. And then we use the cryptocurrency as the means of articulating that asset.
It is really interesting. I mean, these are the kinds of questions that we're trying to get into, because whenever Bytemaster mentioned self-governance, I was thinking, my gosh, this is where we really need to start focusing, because what we're doing now, the closest thing that we have to self-governance now that I see is forum polls. And let's face it, there's a lot we're left wanting from that solution. Bytemaster, you opened up. Do you have something?
I didn't mean to. We're at 1 hour right now, so I'd like to, self-governance is a rabbit hole that goes pretty deep. So, are there any relatively quick questions?
Yeah, I think that we're pretty good then. BM, thank you for showing up, and thank you for forming Cryptonomex to keep the dev team together. And thanks for clarifying some of the things that may have been concerns, because, for all the threads that I've read, I haven't really read a whole lot where that's been stated. So that's something that was kind of an elephant in the room that needed to be, I think, ushered out.
Well, thank you everyone for your support and this whole process. We depend on you guys as much as you depend on us. Let's work together and stop being afraid of each other. I think that's the moral of the story. Give us credit, and we strive to make people happy. That's what we want to do. We don't want to have a reputation of screwing people over. So,
well, that's
something you can count on. And if you're afraid that we might screw you over, just remember we've got family and friends that we've sold BitShares on, and that anything we do to hurt BitShares would hurt everyone around us and our reputations. So that's ultimately what you're trusting. And that's probably more than just, taking my word for it. So there you go.
I'll say this. You guys have been working hard for over 2 years now, a little bit. I've never had a reason not to trust you guys. So if you guys ever hear me saying something, it's because I have been trained to think in a certain way. And I actually think it's a good thing for us to always expect the worst, hope for the best. because at least then if something happens that, generally
I think you said that backwards. I think we should expect the best and prepare for the worst.
Yeah, prepare for the worst. Yeah, well, no, actually, hope for the best, expect the worst, meaning Murphy's Law, right? If it can happen, it will. So just prepare for it.
What you expect tends to happen. You need to expect things to work out right. Otherwise, you're going to subtly create the reality that causes your expectation to become reality. So, you need to expect things to work out or you're going to self-sabotage. And that's just the reality. So, be prepared just in case it doesn't, but expect it to work out.
Well, that's. I think that we actually agree on that. There might be a slight miscommunication in the definitions that we use, but I agree. And I don't think that you guys are going to screw us over. It's just, one thing I do see and that I am very sensitive to is seeing whenever you see people who are loud and producing FUD, it does set doubt in people's minds, right? So, it's important that we have things in place to protect from that. So we can say, even if that happens, we've got this, this, and this. So thank you for your opinions on it. Let's move forward. And let's move forward with this hangout. We will convene next Friday. Is that good with you, Bytemaster?
That might be a holiday for us. So.
Oh, actually, that's good because one of our teammates is going to be gone. So we can maybe call this a holiday for next week.
Sounds good. See you 2 weeks.